We have a tradition in the podcast that we want our guests to introduce themselves personally, kind of tell us, where you're from, what did you study, what are some of the hallmarks of your career, and kind of lead us into what were some of the pain points or some of the things that drove you into the direction of creating this great concept of Disciplined Agile.
Sure. Maybe I'll start. Yeah. So, I started revealing my age here. I started in the mid 80s with a computer science degree, software developer. Back in the Stone Age, to get ahead, you started as a developer, then you became a systems analyst or business analyst. One day you become a project manager. That's how you got promoted. That's how you made more money. Well, I was born to code. I loved coding. And as I went to become a systems analyst, I'm not coding anymore. So I'm a little bit miserable. Then I get into project management and I hate my job, totally miserable. Actually doing real work.
Because you would actually learn something serious, not some of this mumbo jumbo management stuff, right?
Yeah, and back then it was extremely document focused, centric, bureaucratic. I spent my life in meetings, writing up minutes, managing risks. I mean, some of that's kind of fun, but most of it, from my perspective, I wasn't really having much fun. Almost left the industry, and thankfully, a version of Agile was starting to come about, something called the Rational Unified Process. And it was a precursor actually to many of the Agile methods. In fact, many of the
Agile... Yeah, I actually have a client that actually endorsed that methodology for a while.
Yeah, many of what you see in existing prevalent methods nowadays, a lot of the material actually comes from the Rational Unified Process. Yeah. And anyway, so discovered that, then went to work for Rational Software, which was one of the companies to work for back in the days of the dot-coms. And then our company was bought by IBM, and did some consulting before and after those gigs, and got to know Scott, started speaking at the same conferences, and certainly like-minded. And I'm just really flattered and very humbled that Scott actually chose to write the first book with me. I think the combination of Scott's vast knowledge and my sort of in-depth experience in many long engagements using and applying Agile in many different ways, it was a really, really good combination. And it's really good that we came together.
Yeah, definitely. So a similar sort of story. I started in the mid 80s as well. Actually started programming on cards. So, batch programming, and so anyways, all good. And worked in the financial industry in Canada for a while. In software development, got into the data space. Did some pretty heavy data stuff back in the day, and then in the 90s started getting into object orientation, and I had these wild philosophies that object orientation was going to take off, and Windows was going to take off, and this crazy thing called the internet was starting to become popular. And I'd been on the internet since the 80s when I was in school. So anyway, those were wild philosophies back in the day. And then got into the rep space as well, which is where I met Mark. And I guess at the time you were the online leader of the Yahoo discussion group, I think it was, or something.
Yeah. That was IBM's advisory group, and known as one of the experts in rep in Canada.
Okay. And so we knew each other and met at conferences and good stuff like that. But then what was interesting was Mark was leaving IBM. And at almost the exact same time I was joining IBM, a few months apart or something. So so he was going to do consulting like I had been doing, and I was going to work for the corporate behemoth that he'd been doing, and in a way to help agilize RUP, but also to work with clients. So then in the late 2000s. Or the late aughts, I was at IBM leading their IBM Rational's Agile methodology group and Agile consulting effort in a way. And Mark was one of our partners, and so we were working very closely and speaking conferences and all. So we decided to write the first book through IBM Press. But then I left IBM. Yes, the book came out. I left IBM, and then we formed a consulting company together, which then eventually evolved into Disciplined Agile Inc., And so we took the Disciplined Agile, at first was Disciplined Agile delivery, but then it evolved into the Disciplined Agile toolkit, built the organization. We were out in the field consulting. And I think that's why it was, to your earlier point, why it's so pragmatic and practical. We were sharing ideas that we knew worked, and we were putting things into context as opposed to preaching about, here's our fantasy of how we think the world should work, or here's what worked for us on one project, so therefore it's going to work for you across the board. And that we all know, so, it depends is the consultant answer for a reason, because it depends. And so the Disciplined Agile toolkit was all about, let's put techniques into context and let's help people pick the right way of working for them in their situation and to evolve it over time, as opposed to thou shalt have a daily stand-up meeting and thou shalt have 3 questions that thou shalt answer, all the stuff that we were seeing in some of the agile methodologies, which were phenomenally prescriptive. But regardless of the marketing rhetoric, they were phenomenally prescriptive, whereas DA was all about, well, do the right thing in the situation that you face.
Now you're kind of already leading into some of the foundational concepts of Disciplined Agile, but we kind of also want to have a little bit of patience for our viewers. If I'm listening to you though, that you guys were involved in Agile, like you're like the original gangsters of Agile. You guys were using Agile because let's be honest. I mean, the hype of Agile, the word Agile, when did that come about? In the early 2000s?
It was 2001, where the Agile Manifesto was written. And I sort of skipped over it, but I developed or led the development of the Agile modeling method, which at the time was answering very serious questions like, how do you model and how do you document in an Agile way? And those were incredibly unpopular topics at the time, but very important. And then moved on to the Agile data method, which addressed the question, well, how do you do data stuff in an Agile manner? Because if that's not Agile, you've got a serious problem.